The train station was always busy in the mornings. The tiled floor echoed with hurried footsteps, the voices of commuters rising and falling like a restless tide. Somewhere in that noise, the lockers along the far wall stood silent, cold, and patient. To anyone else, they were just metal door storage for briefcases and gym bags. But one locker, years ago, had held something no one dared imagine. Before that locker became a legend whispered in hushed tones, it was just a box of steel. Before the whispers of handprints, before the rumors of laughter echoing from behind closed doors, there was only Emily and a secret she would never forgive herself for. Emily never thought of herself as beautiful. At 17, she was quiet, studious, a girl who often blended into the crowd. She had watched her classmates pair off at dances and linger in the hallways with notes exchanged between hands. She'd wanted that kind of affection, though she told herself it wasn't for girls like her. Then she met Alex. He was 3 years older, already in his first year at the community college, and everything about him seemed larger than life. He had a car, a part-time job at the auto shop, and that effortless air of someone who knew more about the world than she ever would. When he first smiled at her, she felt chosen. He gave her small gifts at first, chocolate bars tucked into her locker, a bracelet made of braided leather, a silver chain she wore proudly beneath her blouse. To Emily, each trinket was proof. She wasn't invisible. She mattered. Her friends noticed, too. He's so much older, they whispered, a mix of envy and suspicion. Emily flushed with pride. For once, she was the girl people envied. That summer, she and Alex became inseparable. They drove out to the lake. Windows rolled down, music humming through cheap speakers. He kissed her in the car as fireflies lit up the trees, and she thought she might burst with happiness. She didn't see how casual it was for him, how easily he brushed off her dreamy questions about the future. To Emily, every touch, every word, was a promise. The first missed period didn't set off alarm bells. Emily had always been irregular, but when a second month slipped by, followed by a third, she felt her chest tighten. The nausea began soon after. The mornings were worst. Waves of sickness that left her pale and trembling. Her breasts ached. Her stomach felt different. She bought a test at a convenience store 2 towns over, hiding the box in her backpack. She waited until her parents had left for church one Sunday morning, then locked herself in the upstairs bathroom. The result appeared quickly, bold and undeniable. Pregnant. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the test into the sink. She told Alex one hot afternoon in June, when the air shimmered with heat rising from the pavement. He sat on the hood of his car, sipping a Coke, sunglasses pushed down his nose. "I think I'm pregnant," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. "Not my problem." Her throat closed. "Alex, look," he said, tossing the can into the trash with a clatter. "Just get rid of it. That's what girls do. Nobody has to know." She flinched as if struck. But Alex was already turning away, checking his phone. The conversation finished in his mind. Emily couldn't tell her parents. Her father worked long hours at the mill. Her mother kept the house spotless and lived by appearances. The thought of their disappointment crushed her. At school, she wore loose sweaters even in the heat of late summer. When her friends asked why she looked pale, she muttered about the flu. Teachers, neighbors, no one pressed too hard. People accepted the excuses at face value. She prayed constantly. She begged God to intervene, to undo what had already begun. But each morning, her stomach felt a little rounder. Each night, her dreams filled with cries she couldn't silence. She clung to Alex, still chasing the boy who had once made her feel special. She believed, or forced herself to believe, that he would change his mind, that once he saw the baby, he would stay. But deep down, she knew. Every day became a performance. Emily laughed when people expected her to, ducked into the bathroom when her nausea threatened to expose her. She kept her head down, her books clutched tightly, her heart thundering whenever someone looked too closely. At home, she wore baggy sweatshirts, slipping past her parents' watchful eyes. Her mother's sharp voice asking about grades became background noise, a reminder of the ordinary life she was leaving behind. At night, she lay awake, pressing her hands to her stomach. Sometimes she swore she felt movement aflutter, a kick in her chest filled with conflicting emotions. Love, fear, guilt. She imagined holding her child, imagined a tiny hand curling around her finger. Then she imagined her father's face when he found out, her mother's tears, and Alex's dismissive shrug. The pressure built with each passing week. The answer came suddenly, violently. In the early hours of a September morning, Emily woke with cramps so sharp they stole the breath from her lungs. She stumbled to the bathroom, muffling her cries with a towel. Blood ran down her legs. The pain came in waves, relentless, tearing through her. And then it happened. The sound was small but unforgettable, the soft thud of fragile flesh against porcelain. Emily froze, staring down at the tiny body. 16 inches. Fingers tipped with translucent nails. A smattering of hair across its bruised scalp. Its skin was pale, faint, slick with blood. She couldn't breathe. Her hands shook violently as she crouched, lifting the child in trembling arms. Its eyelids fluttered faintly, as though trying to see her. Emily? Her mother's voice called from downstairs. Panic surged through her. She wrapped the baby in a towel, shoved it into her satchel, and scrubbed the floor in frantic strokes. Her hands smeared red. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure the whole house could hear. She had to get rid of it. No one could know. The sun had barely risen when she stumbled into the station, her satchel heavy against her side. Every step felt like judgment. She swore strangers' eyes lingered on her too long, that they knew, that they could smell the guilt clinging to her skin. She kept her head down, pressing her hand against the spreading wet patch in her bag. Her breath came fast, uneven. The station was nearly empty. Just a handful of commuters stood scattered across the concourse, their faces buried in newspapers. Oblivious, Emily moved to the wall of lockers, coins trembling in her hands. She chose one at random, sliding the key in. Click. Her hands fumbled with the zipper of her satchel. The bundle slipped from her grip, slick with blood, and she caught it clumsily. Heart pounding, she lowered the tiny body into the dark, metal interior. For a moment, the child's eyes fluttered open. Brown, like hers. They seemed to meet her gaze, to accuse her. "I'll come back for you," she whispered desperately. "I'll make him change his mind. We'll be a family. I promise." The words caught in her throat as tears blurred her vision. She shut the door. The lock clicked, and with it, something in her heart seemed to close forever. Emily left the station that morning in a daze. The world seemed muffled, as though she were moving underwater. The screech of a train pulling in, the bark of a ticket inspector's voice, everything felt far away. She pressed her satchel against her chest. Even though it was empty now, her arms trembling as if they were still carrying something heavy. She walked into school late, cheeks pale, lips dry. Her classmates barely noticed. They were absorbed in their chatter about exams, football games, and who was dating whom. Emily sat quietly at her desk, the noise swirling around her like a storm she couldn't touch. All she could think about was the sound of the locker door clicking shut. That afternoon, she found Alex leaning against the chain-link fence behind the gym, a cigarette dangling from his lips. His eyes narrowed when he saw her approach. "It's gone," Emily said quickly, her voice quivering. He shrugged. "Good." She waited for more, for relief, for an embrace, for gratitude. But he flicked his cigarette into the dirt and checked his phone. That's it, she whispered. What do you want me to say? You handled it. We're fine. He turned, already walking away. Alex, wait, she called, but her voice cracked. He didn't stop. By the end of the week, he'd stopped answering her calls altogether. By the end of the month, Emily saw him at a diner with another girl, his arm slung casually over her shoulder, his smile wide and unbothered. Emily's chest felt like it had been split open. For days, she avoided the train station. She walked blocks out of her way to catch the bus instead. She told herself she wouldn't go back, that what was done was done. But the weight of the promise she'd whisper dial come back for you clung to her like chains. 2 weeks later, she found herself standing before the lockers again, her palms clammy, her breath shallow. The key was still in her pocket, a cold reminder of the choice she had made. She slid it into the lock. The metal door creaked open. A rush of icy air brushed her face. Though the station was warm, her stomach lurched. Inside, the bundle lay twisted, shrunken, its form already succumbing to decay. Emily staggered back, pressing a hand to her mouth. She hadn't known what she expected. A miracle, maybe, a chance to undo what she had done. But there was no undoing. She shut the door quickly, her hands trembling, and locked it again. That night, she dreamed of tiny fingers clawing against steel. In the weeks that followed, Emily tried to bury herself in routine. School, homework, chores. She answered her parents' questions with one-word replies. She avoided mirrors, avoided Alex, avoided the thought of what had once been inside her. But the silence of the locker haunted her. She passed through the station nearly every day, each time glancing sideways, her breath catching in her throat. What if someone else had opened it? What if the police were waiting? What if the truth was about to come crashing down? Yet the locker remained undisturbed. No yellow tape, no crowd of officers, just rows of metal doors, mute and indifferent. Emily's fear began to mingle with something worse, guilt. By winter, Alex was nothing but a bitter taste in her memory. She hated herself for still longing for his approval, for the scraps of affection he had once thrown her way. She hated herself for believing he'd stay. But most of all, she hated herself for the locker. The secret weighed heavier than any textbook she carried. It hollowed her out from the inside, left her staring at ceilings late into the night. Her parents noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she picked at her food, the tremor in her hands. Her mother scolded her for neglecting her health. Her father muttered about teenage moods. They didn't see what was really eating her alive, and she couldn't tell them. Not ever. One bitter February morning, months after it had all begun, Emily decided she had to know. She had to see one last time. The station was nearly empty. Snow tracked across the floor by the few travelers hurrying to their trains. Emily stood in front of the locker, her heart hammering, her fingers frozen around the key. When she opened it, the smell hit her instantly, a putrid stench that made her gag. Inside, what remained was no longer recognizable as the child she had once carried. The sight blurred through her tears. She shut the door and leaned against the cold metal, her body trembling. It's over, she told herself. It has to be over. But it never was. Emily survived high school. She survived graduation. She even managed to leave town, enrolling at a state university far enough away that no one knew her secrets. She met new people, studied hard, and tried to reinvent herself. For a while, it almost worked. By her junior year, she met Daniel. Daniel wasn't like Alex. He was kind, dependable, the kind of man who looked you in the eyes when you spoke. He made Emily laugh. He listened. He never made her feel small. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. When he slipped the ring on her finger, Emily cried not just from joy, but from the weight of the past pressing against her chest. She thought maybe, finally, she could leave it behind. But the locker was still there, waiting in the shadows of her memory. Even on her wedding day, as she walked down the aisle in white, Emily thought of the locker, as Daniel kissed her under the applause of family and friends. A tiny whisper in the back of her mind asked, "What about the child you left behind?" She smiled for the cameras, laughed through the toasts, and pressed her cheek against Daniel's shoulder during their first dance. Outwardly, she was radiant. Inwardly, she carried a shadow that no amount of happiness could erase. Years later, when she and Daniel began talking about children, Emily froze. She wanted to feel life inside her again. Wanted to cradle a baby in her arms, but the memory of that September morning returned like a ghost. She told herself it would be different this time. She was older, wiser, married to a man who loved her. She wasn't the terrified teenager she had once been. But deep down, she feared that the past never truly let go. Emily was 32 when she learned she was pregnant again. She and Daniel had been trying for months, timing cycles, whispering prayers before bed, sharing nervous laughs when each test came back negative. When the little pink line finally appeared, she sat on the bathroom floor staring at it until her hands shook. "Dan," she called, her voice breaking. He came running, and when she showed him, his eyes filled with tears. He dropped to his knees, hugging her so tightly she thought her ribs might crack. "We're going to be parents," he whispered against her hair. Emily laughed, a sound that was half joy and half disbelief. But later, when the house was quiet, she pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered to herself, "This time will be different." Her pregnancy was easier this time, monitored closely by doctors who assured her everything was normal. Daniel fussed over her constantly, making her sit whenever she looked tired, reminding her to drink water, cooking dinner when nausea struck. For the first time in years, Emily felt safe. She allowed herself to imagine nurseries painted in soft yellow, rocking chairs by the window, the sound of lullabies in the evening. But sometimes, when she lay in bed with her hands resting on her growing belly, a shadow would creep across her thoughts. A memory she couldn't erase, the sound of a locker door clicking shut, the whisper of a promise she had broken. She told herself it was just nerves. Every expectant mother felt fear, but hers was different. Hers had roots that stretched back to a morning she'd spent her whole adult life trying to forget. By the 7th month, Emily was still working part-time at the local library. Daniel wanted her to quit early, to rest at home, but Emily insisted she could handle it. She liked being surrounded by books, liked feeling useful. One crisp October evening, she boarded the train after her shift. Phone pressed to her ear as Daniel reminded her not to overdo it. "I'll be fine," she laughed. "I'll be home in time to make dinner." The train screeched into her stop. Emily stepped onto the platform, adjusting her coat around her swollen belly. The station was quieter than usual, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She shivered. The air felt colder here. Somehow, as she crossed the concourse, she glanced to her right. The row of coin lockers stretched along the wall, gray and ordinary, yet her breath caught in her throat. It had been years since she'd stood before one. She told herself not to look. Keep walking. Get home to Daniel. But her steps slowed. Her gaze lingered. And that was when she saw him. A little boy stood a few yards away, near the lockers. He wore red overalls, slightly faded, with small shoes scuffed at the toes. His head was tilted downward, hair falling over his pale forehead. Emily froze. The boy didn't move. "Sweetheart," she called softly, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. "Are you lost?" No response. She looked around. The station was nearly empty. Only a handful of commuters passing by with quick, Distracted steps. No one seemed to notice the child. Emily stepped closer. "Where's your mom?" The boy slowly raised his head. His eyes were wide and brown, startlingly familiar. Her heart lurched. The boy just stared. Silent. Emily crouched awkwardly, wincing at the pressure on her back. "Are you okay?" The boy tilted his head slightly. Then he smiled. It should have been a sweet, innocent smile. Instead, it was wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. A high-pitched laugh spilled from his lips. At first, it sounded like any child's giggle, but it stretched, cracked, splintered into something unnatural. Emily's breath hitched. She tried to step back, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. The boy's small hands reached forward, pressing against the swell of her belly. Emily gasped. His touch was cold, unnaturally strong. The pressure grew tighter, like a vice clamping down. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Her mouth opened and closed uselessly, her throat dry. The boy's pale face tilted up to hers. His skin seemed almost translucent now, veins visible beneath. Dark circles ringed his eyes. "It's you?" he whispered. Her knees buckled. Emily blinked and suddenly the boy was gone. She staggered, clutching her stomach, her breath ragged. The station hummed with its usual indifference, footsteps, announcements echoing from the loudspeakers, the distant squeal of brakes. Had she imagined it? Was it exhaustion? Hormones? Stress? Her hand trembled as she pulled out her phone. She wanted to call Daniel, to hear his voice, to anchor herself to something real. But she couldn't bring herself to tell him what she'd seen. Instead, she whispered to herself, just tired. Yet deep inside, she knew the past had followed her here. That night, Emily tossed and turned beside Daniel, unable to sleep. She swore she heard laughter in the corners of the room, faint but unmistakable. She rose at dawn. Padding to the nursery, they had begun preparing. The crib stood ready, soft blankets folded neatly. A teddy bear sat propped against the pillows. Emily pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the reassuring kick of life within. She smiled, but her smile wavered. This baby will live, she told herself fiercely. This one won't be taken from me. But in her mind's eye, she saw a metal locker door creaking open, small handprints pressed against its surface, and a boy in red overalls staring with eyes that were hers.